Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you joined us live, super happy to have you. If at any point you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm going to be covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on things, see if we can kind of get a conversation started. And if you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really, really helps with the algorithm and engagement so more people can find this channel. So if you have found this channel, you've stumbled upon us, you should subscribe because we're trying to build this community. We do this show every week. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. If at any point you want to, if you want to jump around, by the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down in the description. So you can kind of jump around at your leisure. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. But obviously today, as you can see, and if you look down at the little date on this video, it's Christmas Eve. So I had a real dilemma. Do I skip this week? Do I soldier on? I figured we'll do a compromise. We'll do it early in the morning so I can have time to, spend time with my family. But still do the show. Still for all two of you who care, we can still get some content out this week. So, and again, if you're watching this and you haven't already, please like this video. Again, it really, really helps. And do not forget to subscribe. All right, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend, or week, I should say. Total domestic box office for the last week was a little over 172 million, which was about a 31% jump. And this is to be somewhat expected, considering how low last week was. I forget what last week was, but last week itself was a big drop from the week before. And I kind of talked about how we were kind of in this weird in-between period between like the big boost from Thanksgiving up into Christmas. Obviously, Christmas Day is tomorrow, and some new films are going to be releasing, and we'll talk about those projections. But this last Friday before Christmas is usually also a pretty big day. Primarily, it's a big day because of Star Wars, right? When the sequel trilogy started, instead of doing May, they released in like this kind of last weekend before Christmas, and it worked out very, very well for them. And I feel like everyone's been trying to chase that high ever since. So looking here at number one, coming in at number one, opening this week, we have Sonic the Hedgehog 3, right? This is the third film, obviously, in this Jason Schwartzman, right? Is that or Ben Schwartz? Excuse me, Ben Schwartz, James Marsden Sonic movies. The first two did okay. They were both kind of nestled, kind of bookends of COVID. The first one came out like right before COVID, and then the second one came out kind of near the tail end, like early 2022. This, interestingly though, has fallen below the projections. So the projections were around 65 to 89, and I had put the target around 78. So to give you a sense of how I get these projections, I basically go to a few different sources. So what you're seeing, 65 to 89, is the lowest anyone I saw project, and then 89 is the highest I saw anyone project. The target number is my prediction based in those projections, right? But it fell below that, and it's interesting because all the articles are talking about how well this movie is doing, and $60 million is still pretty good, but again, it fell below that $65 million low projection. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe all the results aren't in, but that doesn't seem right? Because it's Tuesday at this point. But in any case, this is it did take number one. Interestingly, though, it hasn't really opened that much. It hasn't really opened, it looks like, in most of the world. It does have a slightly higher total worldwide gross so far, but it's only like a million, so it might have only opened in like a couple small territories, and for sure that worldwide number will certainly boost, because people love Sonic all over the world. That's a global brand. Interestingly though, has a budget of 122 million, so it's still definitely in the red right now for sure. Though again, worldwide, once it opens in places like Europe, like Japan, it's definitely gonna make back its money. I have no concern about that. Interestingly, the original Sonic opened around 58 million. And then what did the second Sonic open at? I think it was something similar. 72. So this actually is below there must be something going on here with these numbers. Because that just does not seem right. Does it seem right to you guys? I don't know what's going on there. Maybe I did some miscalculations, but I don't think so. Now I'm trying to do this like in real time here. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 box office speeds to 60 million. That's what Variety's saying. I don't know what. That's really interesting that this is underperforming the projections. It's underperforming even the last Sonic movie, so that's really strange. But once it opens in more markets, I'm not surprised. I'm pretty confident that it will be a financial success for them. And it's also turned into like a small critical success. You know, it's not critically acclaimed by any stretch of the imagination, but like on Letterboxd, I think it has like a 3.7 out of 5 compared to the other two, which are like bordering like the 3, right? It might be a little bit higher or lower. Last time I haven't checked in a while, but the other two are kind of considered fine. But this one seems to be both a better movie, but also a lot more fan service because you have Knuckles and Tails all together now. You have Shadow in the mix. Full disclosure, I'm not a Sonic person. It kind of never really appealed to me, so I kind of know these terms, Dr. Robotnik, and that's kind of it. Like I'm very superficial, surface level familiarity with the brands, but from what it seems like, Sonic fans are pretty happy with this film. But despite falling below those projections, it still did come in at number 1, beating our number 2 spot here, Mufasa the Lion King. This is essentially a prequel to the 2019 remake of The Lion King with photorealistic animation. This is directed by Barry Jenkins, of all people. Gotta respect it for getting the bag. I'm sure he walked away with a lot of money. But as soon as like the movie was about to come out, he basically started like distancing himself from the movie. So only brought in around 35, anywhere between 35 and 36 million. Again, also falling below the projections. The projections were around 45 to 65, and I gave it a 54 target. So again, my targets aren't wrong because they're based off of the projections. Because the people who make the projections have access to data I don't have. They have access to like certain ticket sale metrics and things like that. And they can kind of try to track and project where it's going to be. I don't have that. So I have to go off of all these other projections. So, my target is based off of like, okay, well, if they're projecting it in this range, the range seems kind of concentrated here. So this is where I'm going to put my money. It still fell below those projections. And a lot more too. It was like 10 million, around 10 million short. Though interestingly, this did open elsewhere on the globe, in the world, if you will. It has like 126 million worldwide total. So more than doubling Sonic's worldwide total. But like the name of the game is always the name of the game always is, what's the percent return? What's your ROI? The ROI here does not look particularly good, at least right now, right? It was made for $200 million. So like Sonic, it's still in the red, though noticeably not as much in the red. But it does need more dollars, I think, right, to get to its budget level. So I've heard this movie is fine. It's better than it has any right to be, I guess, is like kind of the thinking here. But it's just I don't know what Disney was thinking making this. I'm sure this was greenlit when they thought this would be really profitable. And maybe it will turn out to be profitable. Because again, that's huge. Look at that. Look at the difference between the domestic and the worldwide totals. I guess international audiences eat this shit up just because of the VFX kind of spectacle of it. And it is impressive, in terms of being able to, the fact we can produce the kind of graphics, if you will, even compared to something from 10 years ago, right? So those are like the two big opening films. Another film opening was this kind of indie western film, I think, called Homestead. Opened at 7th place, right? Very small, only opened to about 6 million. But it passed 6 million. And so the projections were 3 to 6 with a target of 4. So this did actually beat projections, even if it was only by about $250. It still beat the projections, right? This has only been playing in the United States. I'd be surprised if this is still in the top 10 next week. I don't have budget numbers on this, but I imagine this was cheap. I bet it's still in the red. I'm sure this didn't cost only $6 million or less. But again, this is a movie that feels like it was made for streaming, so I feel like its theatrical run is just to make as any extra money on top of it, and then it'll make its money over time on streaming, because people like your parents will be like, oh, that looks kind of interesting, and then they'll watch and be like, oh, that was fine. It's kind of just like a nothing movie, it seems like. Continuing in its second week, we have Kraven the Hunter, still in the top 10, but dropping out of the top 5, dropping from 4th to 6th now in its second frame. Made about 6.3 million, 6.4 million. Had about a 42% drop, which honestly is not awful. That's really interesting. Though, again, you have to put the math into perspective. Yeah, it didn't have as big of a percent drop, but it also didn't open very big, right? So I think at a certain point, it's like it can only drop so much, you know, and because look at its opening. Its opening was around 11 million. So, but I will say it kind of held a little bit stronger than I was expecting. Not because the movie's particularly good, but I think it's, again, this weekend, people are more likely maybe to go to the theater. So you might have a lot of people who waited it out last week and now are like, oh, it's like the Christmassy season. People are in town traveling. Let's go to the movie. I can tell you, for example, my fiance was just visiting her family, and I think it was like Friday night or Saturday night. They went to the movies and they went to go see Kraven, right? Just because it was just something to go see, right? This brings its domestic total to about 17 million and its worldwide total to about 43 million. But again, the name of the game is ROI. This is a $120 million budget. I would be shocked if this even gets anywhere close to 120 million. This is not going to have legs. People do not like this movie. They don't even, like, it's not even polarizing. It's just no one really cares. It's kind of just like all these Sony villain movies, Spider-Man villain movies. It's just kind of whatever. Also continuing in its second weekend, dropping from 7th to 10th place, we have Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim, or Rohirrim. I do apologize. I you know, if I had maybe some more subscribers and I had more writing on this, maybe I would like research how to say this. But alas, I have no incentive to. And it's funnier if I mispronounce it, frankly. It brought in about 2.8 million for the week. Again, it fell all the way from 7 to 10. So unless there's a lot of restructuring here, like, you know, I don't think I think the Interstellar re-release is done. So with that out of the picture, it might be able to hold on to a place in the top 10. Again, not an awful drop though, only about 39% drop, but considering it only opened around 4.5 million, that's not a huge surprise. And I heard the movie's fine, right? Again, kind of like we were saying about, what was that movie, Homestead? It feels like it was made for streaming, so any money it can make in its theatrical run. Oh, there's like a little flea flying around me. Do I smell? Any money that it can make in its theatrical run is just extra, right? At least that's the way I see it. This brings its domestic total to about 7.3 million and its worldwide total to about 15. But again, off of a $30 million budget. So every movie we've talked about so far has been so far in the red, except for Homestead, but that's because we just don't know the budget. I would imagine it's in the red. So interesting little period here. But you know what is also interesting? Wicked and Moana. So I was right. I was just wrong about the timing. So when Moana 2 came out, or right before it was about to come out, I had predicted that it would because Wicked was in number 1. I said, okay, Moana's going to take number 1 that first weekend. But then the next weekend, or the weekend after, they're going to swap back with Wicked being ahead of Moana, because Wicked is just a better movie. I haven't seen Moana 2, but I've heard it's not very good, whereas Wicked's like one of my favorite movies of the year, if not of all time. I thought it was phenomenal. It's going to hold. It's going to have a much better staying power than Moana 2. Moana 2 is going to get old very quickly, and you're going to see bigger and bigger drops. I was wrong about the timeline, but I was right about the principle. So, again, in its 5th frame now, so it's been in theaters for over a month, dropping from 2nd to 3rd place, we do have Wicked, making just a little over 25 million, 32% drop. But look at the domestic multiple. So again, if you're new to the channel, the domestic multiple is calculated by dividing the total domestic gross, which in this case is around 385 million, dividing it by the opening gross. And so the bigger the number in the domestic multiple column, the bigger the number, the more money it's making after the opening, which shows longevity. So if you make 50 million in your opening weekend, and then 5 weeks later your total domestic's only 70 million, that's really not very good, because 70 divided by 50 is a pretty low number compared to 385 divided by 112, 113, right? So this is really holding. And it's doing better domestically than Moana, which we'll talk about in a second. It is losing to Moana 2 worldwide, but again, that's to be somewhat expected. But again, just seeing in the top 10 it holding this way, this is in the green. This is not just, it has not only broken even, but it has, been profitable for Universal. And I foresee this to keep playing, kind of almost like having a Greatest Showman effect, where if you remember, the Greatest Showman did not have a super big opening, but word of mouth kind of spread, and it was holding. And I kind of think it kind of released in a similar time, like maybe November, December. It was holding. So by January or February, it was like still in the top 10. It ended up making like a gajillion dollars, to be scientific about it. This isn't exactly the same, since Wicked didn't need good word of mouth because it's so good and it's already a very established brand. But maybe we're seeing something similar where this is just gonna, stay in the top 10. Like maybe it's gonna drop out of the top 5 soon, but it might just stay in the top 10 for a long time. Especially again once you move into January, because January is like the graveyard of film releases. It's where studios put the films they don't think are gonna do very well. January, parts of February, March to an extent, but really January is like the big dead zone. Then August. August is also kind of a dead zone. Also still in the top 5, again to the same point, Moana 2, dropping from 1st to 4th place though, right? So it had a much bigger drop in terms of the rankings, at least, bringing in just almost 22 million. Has decent legs, I would say these are good legs, but still, again, as you can see, not as good as Wicked's so far. Though that's also to be expected because Wicked has been out longer, right? But if I do a quick peek at last week's domestic multiple, it didn't go up very much, right? Like it's still when Wicked was in 4 weeks, it was like at 3.1, right? So it's not holding as well as Wicked is. But again, worldwide, it's making way more. It's like 800 million worldwide. And let me see what it was last week. So last week the worldwide was about 17 million. The 792. So unless this holds, there's a chance this doesn't hit $1 billion. I was pretty sure. But it only went up 80 million worldwide, roughly 80, 70, 80, 90, give or take. So there's a chance this doesn't actually hit $1 billion, which I thought it was gonna do. Though I would imagine this is still the third highest grossing movie, even if it doesn't hit $1 billion. And again, based off of the budget, $150 million, it's very, very profitable for Disney. This is the year of Disney learning all the wrong lessons of if we just make sequels to popular movies, they'll make a gajillion dollars. Again, to be very scientific about it. Also still in the top 5, dropping from 3rd to 5th place, in its 5th frame now, we have Gladiator 2, bringing in about 8.2 million for the week. This had better legs than Moana. 154 million domestically, about 406 million worldwide. So it's not that far behind something like Wicked. The issue though is that it costs like 50% more to make. It costs $230 million. That was the budget. So it's crossed that initial threshold, but in the world of film, you want to double your budget to account for all the marketing and advertising costs that aren't part of that budgetary figure. So it'll be interesting to see as we move past Christmas, into New Year's, into January, how many of these films are still in the top 10. I would imagine Wicked and Moana 2 are going to be in the top 10 for the foreseeable coming weeks, as well as Sonic the Hedgehog. Mufasa, maybe. Gladiator 2, possibly. And then everything else I think is going to drop out. So looking at everything else just quickly, we have Kraven the Hunter. We already talked about Kraven. I think we talked about everything except... the only things we haven't talked about were the Interstellar re-release. It's still in theaters. There's not much more to say about it. I think this is the last week of it, though. I think it stopped on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. So that's basically done. But then we still have Red One, which is really interesting, especially since it is currently now on streaming on Amazon Prime. Because Amazon, of course, owns MGM Studios, which, of course, runs which is I believe made this movie. In its sixth frame, dropped from sixth to ninth place. Made a little under 3 million. Kind of a biggest drop, like 56. But again, it's holding really interestingly. It's made 95 million domestically, 182 worldwide. For a film that is very much made for streaming and it was not particularly good based off the reviews that I read. It's doing pretty well. Now, again, the ROI is where it gets knocked down because it was made for so much money due to probably cast salaries. So it's still in the red. But again, for a movie that seems like the strategy is put it in theaters just to make as much money as possible, and then we'll put it on the streaming as to build out the library, this seems like mission accomplished. Because I'm sure they can make up the difference through, through all the ancillary parts of this market. So it's just an interesting situation. This part of the year of the box office is always interesting. So it will be cool to see again what remains the first week of January, right? Looking ahead to films releasing this week, most of these are actually coming out tomorrow on Christmas Day. I think one of these maybe is actually releasing on Friday the 27th. But we have Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, a remake of the iconic film from the 1920s, the German expressionist, like the German expressionist movie, right? This is projected to make around 12 to 27 million. I'm putting the target around 19. Forewarning, some of these projections here are a little misleading because it was hard for me to find. A lot of people put their projections for like the 3-day projections, like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but technically they're going to be open for 2 extra days. So I tried to give like as wide of a range as possible. Robert Eggers is one of my favorite directors. He did The Witch, Lighthouse, The Northman, which didn't get a lot of love, but I thought was one of his best. So it'll be interesting to see how well this does. Interesting to release this movie like around Christmas time. I'm not sure what the thinking was on that. Maybe they determined it wouldn't play well in October or November because it would be too crowded with other awards movies. I'm not sure. But right now this is leading the pack in terms of the projected gross. Then we also have A Complete Unknown, the James Mangold directed Bob Dylan music biopic starring Timothée Chalamet as the Bob Dylan. Projected, it's kind of similar projections to Nosferatu, but just a little bit lower, around 11 to 27, and I'm putting the target around 18. I've heard this is actually pretty good, but it'll be interesting to see, what appetite do American audiences have for music biopics. Is the genre has been going for so long? Is our audiences getting tired of it? I don't know. Then we also have Baby Girl. This is kind of like a psychosexual thriller with Nicole Kidman having a weird dom sub relationship with she's like a girl boss executive at a company, and the guy in this picture is like an intern there, but they start this like weird, I don't want to put weird, I'm not trying to kink shame, but like a dom sub kind of relationship, but she's the sub, right? Even though professionally she's the one with the power. This is a smaller movie. It's projected to make around 3 to 11. I'm going to put the target around 6. This is something smaller. Again, why it's being released on Christmas Day, I do not know. Probably because I think they just want to try to squeak it in, so it would qualify for like things like the Oscars, but they couldn't figure out where else to put it, or maybe they weren't ready to release it until now. And then we also have another biopic, but this time a sports biopic, The Fire Inside. I always forget who this is about because I'm not a super big sports person. This is about Clarissa T-Rex Shields. And the movie's about her training for the 2012 Summer Olympics. I guess if you know about boxing in the Olympics, you might know a little bit more about her. Unfortunately, I do not. This is, again, a small movie. It's only projected to make around 3 to 8 million. I'm going to put the target around 4. This feels, of all the movies, this and A Complete Unknown feel like Christmas Day movies. Not for anything intrinsic, just based off of like what kinds of movies are usually being released on Christmas Day. A music biopic and a sports biopic. And they're both, well, maybe the Bob Dylan one isn't uplifting necessarily, but this one's like an uplifting sports story. So, but it's going to be small, right? And that's the thing, is that I think we've seen the big money be put here in the Thanksgiving season with Wicked and Moana and now Mufasa and Sonic, and everything else is kind of going to be fighting for the scraps. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. let's talk about story number one. So Pixar's original animated series, Win or Lose, it's going to be coming out in February, I believe. It was announced or revealed. The story was broken by The Hollywood Reporter. It's been reported that the show will no longer include a transgender storyline. Again, this was exclusively broken by Hollywood Reporter, THR. A source close to the show, to the project, says the decision was made several months ago, right? So this isn't something that they just decided recently, supposedly. And when this was revealed, Disney, put out a statement. I think THR reached out to them, and their response to the story breaking was, quote, "When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their own terms and timeline," end quote. Which is really disappointing and very unfortunate language, right? Kind of framing the existence of trans people as like this ideological thing that parents need to weigh. When should we talk to our kids about this? As if it's not just a lived reality that exists, right? So again, a little context on this show. So Win or Lose, this is an upcoming show by Pixar for Disney+. Notably, this is like the first original series that Pixar is doing that's not based on a pre-existing film. It was a big deal when they did like a show on Disney+. I think they did like a Monsters, Inc. University spinoff, and then recently they just launched like the show, was it called Dream Productions? It's like based off of like the Dream filmmaking in Inside Out and like that universe. But this would be like the first like an original thing, an original set of characters and storylines and things like that. It's currently scheduled for February of this upcoming year of 2025. I think it was supposed to come out earlier, but they kind of shuffled some things around to accommodate Dream Productions. Because that's so important. You gotta accommodate Dream Productions. And the premise of the show is that it would follow a co-ed middle school softball team, I think called the Pickles, which is cute. And each of the 8 episodes would focus on the off-the-field life of one of the characters, whether it be one of the players or one of the parents or a coach or the umpire even, and kind of use that as like a way to frame what's going on the field. And that's how the best sports shows or movies are, is that you don't just have the stuff on the field over here and then the stuff off the field over here. So ideally they're like talking to one another. Like the two worlds are informing one another and one frames our understanding of the other and vice versa, right? And reportedly, I say that as if it's like a mystery. No, we know this. So reportedly, one episode of the show would have focused on a trans character, one of the students, or one of the players. And I think this is real. A storyboard of this sequence actually leaked following this announcement of like the character going to a bathroom. And it's this really interesting, subtle, I mean, again, it's only in storyboard form, but it's like this very subtle but powerful exploration of gender dysphoria using like abstract geometric shapes. So like as the character's looking in the mirror, like their face starts to almost become like a Picasso painting. And it's this really interesting, intuitive way of explaining what it's like to be trans and wrestling with the disconnect between your identity and the body that you exist in, right? The character will still be in the show. They're not being cut out. But dialogue referencing the character's gender identity or their transness will be removed, right? And this is just another blow it reflects Disney's very complicated relationship with the queer community, right? Because, the queer community, and I'm using that as a very broad blanket term, and I know there's diversity within it, and because obviously there's gay, lesbians and trans people, and obviously there's a lot of diversity. But just for the sake of speaking, I'm just going to use this blanket term, the queer community, right? It's the community is a major part of Disney's fan base, right? Like when you think of Disney adults, like there's a Venn diagram of gay adults and Disney adults, and there's like a big overlap. It's not a circle, it's not on top of each other, but there's a big overlap, right? Whether it be because Disney is about embracing your individuality, or they like the songs, or they were picking up on all the queer coding from the 90s in these movies. In any case, the queer community a lot of people love Disney in this world, right? And there's been a lot of queer baiting, right? So Disney's aware of this affinity that they have. So, there's a lot of kind of signaling things to the community to make it seem like they care and that they want to be more inclusive and bring them into the fold, and take them out of the margins, right? So, I feel like for the last decade, Disney has announced, like, this will be the movie with the first gay Disney character. I feel like they've said that 800 times. They can't all be the first gay Disney character. And what often ends up happening is they'll hype this up, and it'll be like a blink and you miss it little moment, or they might kiss someone, or they're holding the hand, a woman's holding a hand with another woman, and these are always so quick blinking you miss it, so that they can edit that 2-second shot out for when they release it in countries that have stricter censoring and they're more homophobic, like maybe something like I don't want to call them out, but something like Saudi Arabia, right? That might be not fair to Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure if they're one of those countries, but I think it's like one of those, maybe like the UAE or something. Because ultimately at the end of the day, Disney's a corporation first, right? They would love to be inclusive, and I'm sure the individual people within Disney are maybe very passionate about these issues. But the system, the corporate entity, only cares about those issues insofar as they can make the money. They only embraced the queer community and signaled that embrace when they deemed it profitable. So again, like the mid to late 2010s, following, the legalization of gay marriage. But things like this storyline being cut show that inclusion is conditional. That it is not this unconditional, we are embracing you because you are at the margins and we need to tell your stories. Rather, it's all about money. So if it's not going to make us money, or worse, it's going to cost us money, inclusion's out the window. It's conditional. And notably, Disney has been becoming more cautious and sometimes even hostile, right? Famously, one of the final straws of Bob Chapek's tenure as CEO at Disney was the whole "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida, where the Florida and Ron DeSantis were trying to pass this bill where you basically couldn't talk about gay people existing in public schools to young children because it would be inappropriate to talk about that stuff. And Disney didn't put out a statement, and people within the company were mad that Bob Chapek didn't take a more firm stand, considering that a bunch of their business operations happen in Florida with their theme parks. So then they finally do make a statement, but it was very tepid, and they pissed off all the conservative people. So he basically made no one happy. So that was a big issue. More recently, I did a whole video about this. Leading up to the release of Inside Out 2, Disney, basically from on high gave decrees to try to remove any gay undertones between the character Riley and her friend that she really admires. And some thought, okay, well maybe, she's a lesbian, perhaps. So they wanted to make sure that they it was like very explicit, like we need to make her seem less gay. But it's also like, why? Like, what's wrong with her being gay, right? And then even more recently, there was a similar thing like this where there's a Disney Channel animated show. It's like based off of a Marvel comic, like a really obscure one called Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And there was an episode that was going to feature a recurring trans character. And members of the production claimed that Disney banned the episode. Disney then denied it was banned. You can also find those storyboards, but I think they're also voiced. Or storyboards more like animatics, like partially finished. It's actually pretty interesting. So again, you keep having this very explicit, like we are going to remove these elements. And reactions have not been very good. The saddest reaction of which is from the voice actress, 18-year-old Chanel, I think is her name, Chanel Stewart. The Hollywood Reporter notes that she won this role when she was 14 after responding to an open casting call for a trans actress, right? I don't know if she was an actress, but she just saw it and was like, this is me. I should try this. What do I have to lose? And despite, supposedly, the decision having been made months ago, she only found out like last week, like the day before the story broke, right? And responding to this happening, she said, quote, "I was very disheartened. From the moment I got the script, I was excited to share my journey to help empower other trans youth. I knew this would be a very important conversation. Trans stories matter and they deserve to be heard," end quote. And what's an even sadder quote is from her mother. Stewart's mom weighed in and said, quote, "It was upsetting because my daughter is transgender and this is her life. I felt like it was very important that we not hide that fact. There may be some parents out there who are not ready to have that conversation, but this is the world that we live in, and everyone should be represented. Everyone deserves to be recognized." And it felt like it was just another setback for the LGBTQ community because it's very hard on transgender teenagers, transgender people, period. Especially when you're young and you're trying to figure out how to navigate this world that you live in and be able to grow into your own person, end quote. I think that's so insightful, everything that Stewart's mom said. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're talking about children who are understanding something fundamental about the nature of themselves, but they don't have the words to express it or even understand it. So more content, especially for children, that gives them a framework to try to process what's happening, would be so valuable. And and let me give you a statistic. I didn't even write this in my notes, but I'm very passionate's the wrong word, but I'm very, if someone's arguing against this, I can get pretty heated about it. We talk about a male loneliness epidemic, which is true. That young men are lonelier than they've been, they're more depressed than they've ever been, and I think right now the percent of male teenage boys, assuming cis teenage boys, the percentage of teenage boys who have seriously considered killing themselves is about 12 to 15%. That's horrifying. If you have a group of 10 boys, about one of them has considered killing themselves. That's awful. The percent of trans teenagers who have seriously considered killing themselves is 50 to 60%, right? So this is a life issue. This is a life or death issue. This is not ideological. This is not political. This is, saving lives. I'm not saying that by doing this they're killing people by taking the story out, but this is perhaps the first domino in the chain that can help trans kids or kids who haven't even come out as trans, but they're trying to they just don't have the words to express it or explore it. This is just very disappointing, and I think it does reflect, a post-Trump world. Again, they claim this decision was made months ago, but that seems dubious, but it doesn't undermine this, because corporations are seeing Trump's victory as a rejection of quote-unquote wokeism, which I just fundamentally disagree with. I think if you look at any of the trends, people didn't embrace conservative social values. They embraced economic populism. It really had nothing to do with the woke whatever, right? But that's what corporations think. So because of that, now they're in a position where it's not advantageous. Not only is it not advantageous to embrace these issues and embrace social progress, sometimes it might actually be detrimental. So they're less willing to embrace it. They're more willing to actively reject it. They're scaling back any diversity, DEI efforts, whatever. And again, even if this was decided months ago, it doesn't mean it's removed from the Trump factor, because the last couple months of the campaign, the ads really leaned into like this anti-trans hysteria of Kamala is for they, them. Trump is for you. So I think the corporations are looking at what they think is the writing on the wall and going, maybe if we embrace this, we're going to not make as much money, right? And that's all corporations. And that's true of a lot of media corporations, but especially Disney, because now that you have Bob Iger back, when he returned to save Disney, right? He mentioned that, he feels that the content had become too political, right? But again, the content is not political at all. All it is just the standard status quo politics, just with a new coat of paint. So it's the same kind of movies, just now with a black actor or like a female lead, right? The shows aren't particularly, the content isn't particularly political. So when people say it's become too political, it's a dog whistle, but they really mean too diverse. Whether it be racially or gender or, exploring something like the trans trans identities, right? Notably, most recently, ABC was getting in hot water with Trump. George Stephanopoulos had said Trump had been found legally liable for rape, which technically wasn't true. It was for sexual harassment or whatever it was. So Trump sued for defamation. There's a good chance that he wouldn't have been able to win, but Bob Iger decided it would be bad for business to go through this trial. Let's just settle. So again, it shows that corporate America, especially media companies, especially Disney, because of Bob Iger, they care much more about money than principles. That they are willing to throw the LGBTQ community under the bus, which is sad for a number of reasons. Again, the principle part of it, but then also just purely this kind of content. Who knows how many lives this storyline may have, again, through a domino effect, a butterfly effect way, how many lives could have been changed for the better because of these stories, whether it be the kids themselves or other kids seeing it so that they can then understand the experience of their trans classmate, or their parents can see it and understand the experience of their trans children. So this is just really, really unfortunate. Viviana put a great comment here in the live chat. Please get in contact with local trans support services ASAP. Places like community health centers can connect you with the resources to do name changes and surgery letters before January 20th. That's a really great point. I don't want to fearmonger, but, things may get harder once Trump is officially in office. So that's a great comment, Viviana. So if you're watching this, seek the support you need because it might become harder, unfortunately. Okay, let's do something a little more fun. Let's have some hope. Let me get a quick drink. Okay. Let's talk about story number 2, if I can find it. Okay. So, this is very exciting. The first trailer for James Gunn's Superman has finally released. This was the film originally titled Superman Legacy. Now it's just Superman. Though noticeably, the trailer didn't actually have a title card. Because we all know what it's called, right? Perhaps this is more of a teaser than a full trailer, because usually, I guess, it's really semantics, but I would say a trailer has at least a little bit of dialogue, and gives us a little bit more of a sense of the general maybe conceit of the story. Whereas this is more of just it's more kind of flashes of what we'll be seeing, right? But it's a very juicy teaser nonetheless. It's a good length. It's not a minute long. And we get good looks at Superman now, David Cornsweet in the outfit. We saw that original picture that was released, and I did a whole story about that. But now we're seeing everything in action. We also get to see his Clark Kent. It kind of looks like Noah Centineo, right? The guy from Netflix. He has kind of the curly bush top kind of thing. We also got our first real good look at Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, looking deliciously evil as Lex Luthor should. We also got Crypto the Super Dog. This is the first time I think we're getting him in live action. And I believe I read that, because I think in the comics he's almost more like a greyhound kind of dog, but James Gunn changed it to this breed of dog that you see in the trailer, because that's the dog he got that kind of dog during COVID. And he feels really attached to that dog, so he's like, well, let's play around with the mythology a little. I don't think it's super important that Crypto's a greyhound, right? And there was also a sprinkling of other DC superheroes, like one of the Green Lanterns. There was Hawkgirl. I think some other more obscure people that I don't know, but if you know comics and if you know comics the way James Gunn knows it, there's a lot of deep cuts here that I wouldn't even know. But we got a lot of really great looks at everything, right? A lot of stuff and good looks at that stuff. The music for the trailer is this electric guitar version of John Williams' Superman theme. Someone compared it to because John Williams' music is almost sacrosanct. It is like the national anthem, right? And someone compared this version of it to when Jimi Hendrix did the electric guitar version of the Star Spangled Banner. At Woodstock, right? And this has been a very successful trailer. It was viewed over 250 million times. And reportedly, it's the most viewed trailer in the history of both DC and Warner Brothers. And here's what I'm going to talk a lot about Gunn's kind of modus operandi here, but I'll talk a lot about that later, but I do have a quote from Gunn here saying, quote, "This movie at the end of the day is not about power. This movie is about, in the loose sense of the word, a human being struggling with his day-to-day life. And we see a different aspect of him at the beginning. I thought it was a cool place to start the trailer and the movie, frankly," end quote. Because, yeah, it starts with him landing in the Arctic, presumably near the Fortress of Solitude. He's all bloody and he's like, he's like wheezing, basically. So again, very different kind of Superman, right? And if you're really excited about this, you don't have to wait too long. This will be coming out July 11th, 2025. So a little bit of background on this. You have a lot of pieces all coming together to create something really interesting here. James Gunn, of course, very popular writer and director, most notably he didn't direct, but he wrote the 2 theatrical Scooby-Doo live-action movies. As my fiance Viviana affectionately calls the first one, Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Or not Zombie Island, on Spooky Island. Zombie Island is an animated one, but it's just called Scooby-Doo, Viviana. I know you're watching. It's just called Scooby-Doo. It's not Scooby-Doo on Spooky Island. But of course, most famously, James Gunn wrote and directed the 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies for the MCU, as well as the 2021 Suicide Squad film. The Suicide Squad. It gets a the. And he's primarily known best for his like ensemble stories that have a decent balance of comedy and sincerity, right? And kind of his work's a little hit or miss for me. People love the Guardians films and they call it not only the best films in the MCU, but some of the best films ever. I'm like, I don't know. It's a little hit or miss for me, but I see the appeal. I see why people like Gunn's work. And famously, how we kind of got here, because it's like, okay, well, how did he end up now writing and directing the Superman movie? Famously, he got fired from Marvel. I think it was back like 2017 or 2018. It was kind of during it wasn't really quite Me Too, but it was in that same kind of era. Conservatives kind of wanted to get like their casualties, like they wanted to take someone down from like the liberal side, because James Gunn, of course, is very liberal. So they found all these old edgy tweets he had tweeted that were admittedly very tasteless or distasteful. Making jokes about things you shouldn't make jokes about. And during the fervor, Disney, reading the writing on the wall with all these, other situations happening with like actual bad stuff, they fired him. They removed him from the third Guardians movie. DC smartly scooped him up and they were like, hey, why don't you make a Suicide Squad movie, which is basically like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Sure enough, all of this blew over, so Marvel decided, you know what, let's have you come back for Guardians 3, finish the trilogy. But he was still doing Suicide Squad, so we ended up doing Suicide Squad in 2021, and then the third Guardians, I think, came out in 2023, right? Once Warner Brothers had its big merger, they decided they needed to restart their DC cinematic universe. What they had done with the Zack Snyder kind of offshoots of everything just was not working. So they decided to hire him along with another guy, Peter Safran, to lead this new enterprise, kind of like how Kevin Feige, is like kind of the creator and like the mastermind behind the MCU. But interesting though, unlike Kevin Feige, James Gunn is like a writer director himself, whereas Kevin Feige is mostly just a producer. So the question was like, well, will he just kind of produce them and kind of shepherd the creative vision like Feige would, or is he gonna like make some of these movies? And sure enough, he's writing and directing the very first one. And his kind of vision for this, he wants to contrast it with like the MCU, and he wants the films to feel distinct. And he said, quote, I want each project to have the feelings of the individual artist that's working on it and to give them a lot of freedom, as long as it works, to create something special. Because what I found through Marvel, what wasn't exciting was when movies were tonally the same, end quote. And that's such a great insight. Not because it's revolutionary, I feel like everyone says that, but it's really great to hear someone who's been part of the machine say it. And that's been the big problem with Marvel, is that the kind of... And they were a little bit different when you started. The original Iron Man is very different than the Incredible Hulk, which was very different than Thor and Captain America. Like, they all have their very distinct feels. But then once Avengers came out, it felt like every movie was basically just trying to be the Avengers in terms of the tone, like that kind of Joss Whedon tone. So I think Gunn is acknowledging, like, that led to a lot of sameness and people kind of getting bored with it because there was nothing new. Even if average moviegoers aren't attuned to, like, the language of film, implicitly they understand that they're basically just getting the same thing over and over and over and over. And again, this film now, this new super movie, will be the beginning of a new DC cinematic universe. Like I said, the DCEU was an unmitigated disaster. You know, even if you like those films, like, if you like some of them, then you definitely don't like some of the others. Like, there's no one, I think, who likes all of the movies in the DCEU or likes a large majority of them, right? And nevertheless, even if you did, they just never quite congealed into a cohesive universe. Not you know, it's almost like the other extreme. They were just all so different and seemed to have completely different priorities. They never really cohered into anything interesting. And what will make this interesting, and I think what made Kevin Feige in the MCU work so well, is that Kevin Feige is a comic book nerd. He knows his stuff. And Gunn is similar. He has a deep knowledge and affection, from my understanding, he has a deep knowledge and affection for comics in general, specifically Marvel comics, or DC comics. You know, he knows all the great stories, you know. So that's how you're getting these deep cuts. And, you know, not just doing the same story. You know, it's not an origin story. He's going to basically already be Superman, you know. And he knows all the different great stories, so he has a sense of what he can pull. He knows what ingredients that are already out there. Like, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, that piece of that story is really interesting. Let's maybe pluck that, and then, that's kind of interesting, and let me add something from my own ideas here and make something really cool. And kind of talking about this being a little bit more of a comic booky movie, and again, having more kind of esoteric deep cuts. James Gunn spoke about this, saying, quote, "Superhero movies have taken these characters and said, okay, it's Batman or it's Superman, but it's not any of the other stuff. We're embracing all of the Superman mythology. He has friends who are other superheroes. He has people he doesn't get along with who are other superheroes. He has a lot of things that we love from the Superman comics that we haven't been able to see as much of in filmed media, and definitely have been able to see in a grounded way, which is what I hope we've created," end quote. And again, this is the beginning of this new cinematic universe. Other films have already been announced, and I think dated, maybe, if not the exact day, but maybe like the month or at least the year. You know, other films have already been announced as like this first phase. The only one that's coming to mind is like a Batman movie. But again, it's cool because this is, despite other stuff being planned, this can kind of stand on its own in some ways. It will always be the first one. Though it's not the first Superman movie, of course. Notably, though, compared to something like Batman, he's had far less movies and far less actors portraying him. And I'm looking at just big screen movies. Of course, there's been a gajillion shows. Smallville was my gateway into Superman. To me, that's like the definitive Superman, or at least the Superman I like best. At least like the earlier seasons of it. But again, there's only been a couple portrayals, right? So famously, of course, is Christopher Reeve, who played Superman 4 times in the 1978 Superman, and then throughout the 80s in Superman 2, 3, and 4. And the quality and reception went down and down with each one. Then you had Brandon Routh, of course, playing the role in the 2006, I think it was 2006, Superman Returns, which I remember kind of liking as a kid, but it's kind of boring. It's kind of a little misguided by Bryan Singer. Awful guy. Then, of course, you have Henry Cavill, who was like the DCEU version, the DC Extended Universe version with Zack Snyder and Man of Steel, and then Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and then Justice League. Both versions of both the Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder version. And now we have David Corenswet, right? So this guy, he's been in stuff before. This is like a huge level up for his career. And it seems like he really understands the character. He said, I forget who he was speaking to, but he said here, quote, "I think a lot of people consider Superman to be a naive character, at least to have a naivete about him. I think there's an element of that, but I think it really is just a sort of a blindness to the little imperfections and the little conflicts, the silly little things that we get caught up with as people. I tend to miss those, and I think Superman misses those, and that's what keeps him steadfastly and determinatively looking at the good and the hopeful and the future, and grounded in the fun and playfulness of the present," end quote. And there's a really, I don't know if I wrote it down here, but, you know, he seems like he really gets it. And this movie's all about, I'm going to talk about this a lot, this movie seems to all be about hope, about the optimism of Superman. Very much to contrast the Henry Cavill, you know, like almost sociopathic, emotionally detached Superman from like Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and things like that. They were like when the costume designer first showed James Gunn like the initial costume idea, it was so colorful and bright, and James Gunn was like, I like it, but I don't know, maybe is it too much? And David Cornswet went, no, this makes sense within the world of the story because Superman would want kids to know he's a good guy. He would want kids to know that he is someone they can trust. So he would want to have a suit that's appealing to children. And James Gunn went, that's perfect. That's insane, right? Just that little conversation gives you so much insight to the character that it is diegetically colored that way, right? But yeah, of all the other versions of all the other Superman films we've got, really only the original one from 1978 is really beloved by people. But again, the films struggle with the same thing all Superman stories do, regardless of the medium. How do you make a compelling story about a guy who's fighting people, but he's invincible, right? Because there's no physical stakes unless there's kryptonite. But at that point, now you've made him kind of not Superman, right? So the best Superman stories, from my understanding, because I'm not a comic nerd, I have read All-Star Superman. That's probably the only Superman comic I've ever read, because that was like a limited graphic novel, a limited series. But from my understanding, the best Superman stories focus on the emotional stakes of the conflicts rather than the physical ones, right? And it seems like that's what we're getting here, right? And like I said, Gunn seems to really want to focus on Superman's unwavering sincerity and selflessness, right? Again, Cavill's Superman was like this detached, godlike figure. Contrast that with the Superman in this trailer, saving that little girl, right? That seems very small potatoes, but like to him, that is as important as like stopping the bomb is about to go off, right? Like, things like that are really important. David Cornswet's Superman cares deeply about others and their safety. Those are the stakes, right? Not his own physical safety, but the physical safety of others. And Gunn is really using Superman as almost like a cipher to look at our current world. And I have this extended quote, from Gunn about how Superman represents goodness and our capacity for goodness. And he says here, quote, "We do have a battered Superman at the beginning, and I think that is our country." Because this is very much following, where we are right now, politically. Anyway, back to the quote. Quote, "I believe in the goodness of human beings, and I believe that most people in this country, despite their ideological beliefs or politics, are doing their best to get by and are trying to be good people, despite what it might seem like to the other side or what that other side might be. And I think this movie is about that. It's about the basic kindness of human beings, and that it can be seen as uncool or it can be seen as under siege when some of the darker voices are some of the louder voices. I live in a very rural part of Georgia, and I see the kindness and the beauty of the people every day who don't share all the same world beliefs as I do, but I think that's what the movie is about. The basic fundamental decency of human beings all over the world," end quote. That's really beautiful, right? And I think there is a fallacy with the idea of like, oh, we need civilian, can't we just all get along? Because usually the bad actors abuse that and exploit that. But that's not what Gunn seems to be saying. He seems to be saying not tolerating, not being civil, but it's like what Jesus said, like, love your enemies, even as they persecute you. Like, giving yourself over completely and doing good for those who certainly don't deserve it, right? Because none of us really do. And that's what Superman represents, is that unbounded grace and that unbounded goodness. And I think this movie is hopefully going to break through some of the cynicism that we have. There was an IGN article posted following this trailer from writer Amelia Emberwing titled, "The new Superman trailer does the impossible. It will force you to feel hope." And I put a little quote from this article saying, quote, "You feel every second of this trailer. It almost forces you to, demanding that you take your hurt or your bitterness and dare to remember what hope feels like," end quote. So this could really capture the zeitgeist. Who knows? So much can happen between now and July, but just this trailer alone just gives me just a huge swell of hope, and I'm really excited for it. Again, I'm not. James Gunn's kind of hit or miss for me, but this seems like he's dialing back all of his worst instincts that I don't really like. This seems like this could be a really, really special cinematic experience. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Sorry, we're kind of going long today, but these next couple stories are a little shorter. Okay, let's talk about story number 3. So podcaster and journalist Kara Swisher, pictured here to my left, she is reported to be trying to, round up a group of rich people that she knows to fund a bid to purchase the Washington Post from Jeff Bezos. This is a scoop from Axios, and her thinking is that Bezos will want to sell the Washington Post since the newspaper, in her words, has become a managerial nightmare. So who's Kara Swisher? You might have no idea who this is. So she is a pioneering tech journalist going back to like the mid 90s, just as like the internet, primarily focused on the internet back when tech reporting was like just becoming its own dedicated beat for a journalist. And she's had a very storied career and has written for several publications, including the Washington Post, which is, I think, why she feels some affinity for it, as well as the Wall Street Journal. She co-founded the publication Recode, which was later acquired by Vox. Then she went to the New York Times. That's how I was introduced to her, through her podcast with the New York Times called Sway. And now she's back at Vox, or not really back, but she's looping back over to Vox Media. And she's now the editor-at-large at New York Magazine, which is owned by Vox. And her whole shtick, aside from like the tech journalism part, she's known for being very direct and confrontational. Not in a bad way, but like, no nonsense when she's interviewing people. Or at least that's the idea. I personally think, I've only been listening to her for like maybe 2 or 3 years now. I would say she's lost a little bit of her edge. Her new show with Vox is called On with Kara Swisher. And I really listen to it now because I feel like every episode is just like some Democratic Party, representative or like mouthpiece. And it's basically just them going back and forth about how great the liberal elite is. And again, if you're watching this, if you follow this channel, I'm not coming at this from the right. I'm coming at this from the left. I'm very, very left-wing. So I'm not saying the liberal elite in a conservative posturing, but rather this kind of apathetic neoliberalism, patting yourself on the back when you just lost one of the most unlosable elections of all time. So she's lost a little bit of that edge, but she's still really interesting. I still listen to her stuff, especially her podcast she does with Scott Galloway, who has his own podcast. So she kind of introduced me to him. And, but again, she's really so she cares a lot about the Washington Post, and tech is like her big thing. And, she's not afraid to, she's a very short, cantankerous, middle-aged lesbian, and she's like, this very interesting character. And again, the Washington Post seems to be really important to her. So a little bit of background on the Post. This newspaper, this is very old. This was founded back in 1877. Kind of had mixed success over like a century. Really made its biggest splash in the 1970s with the publishing of the Pentagon Papers. Woodward and Bernstein were the ones who broke open Watergate. They were Washington Post reporters. And as of 2023, it has 136,000 print subscribers and 2.5 million digital subscribers. This would make it the third largest, either print or digital newspaper, following New York Times and then Wall Street Journal. But that being said, it's still down from where it was before. It's still struggling along with the rest of the industry, the rest of legacy journalism. And the paper was then sold to a holding company, which was owned by Jeff Bezos in 2013, so about a little more than a decade ago. Of course, Jeff Bezos, the founder and the former president and CEO of Amazon, second wealthiest person in the world, with a net worth of $251 billion, with a B. And he was the wealthiest, number one, from 2017 to 2021. So he's not only one of the wealthiest people alive, but just by the nature of inflation, one of the wealthiest people to ever live. So what makes Kara Swisher's ambitions here with the Washington Post is that, the wrap notes, Bezos hasn't given any indication that he wants to sell. But I guess the question is, should rich people own journalism, right? It's useful for the economic side of things, right? Because, the way journalism works, at least print journalism and even now digital, but like the traditional journalism format is basically the more lowbrow stuff pays for the highbrow stuff. That, in a perfect world, the investigative reporting, the real nutritious journalism happening, that's not going to necessarily bring in a bunch of money. What brings in a lot of money are the cartoons and the word searches and the recipes, especially online with ads, right? That stuff kind of pays for essentially the public good of journalism that people do, right? So having a billionaire owner is good for the economics because you have a little bit more money, a little more of a cash flow, so you don't have to rely as much, or you're not as tied. Your hands aren't as tied in terms of the amount of money you can deploy to the journalistic side of things. But it's bad for the actual work that is getting done, right? Because again, there can be conflicts of interest. People always claim, of course, the ownership there's a firewall between ownership and editorial. So theoretically, the Washington Post could publish negative stories about Jeff Bezos, but it's probably less likely at the very least. And most recently, I did a video about this on the channel. The editorial board was about to put out an endorsement of Kamala Harris, and Bezos killed the endorsement because he didn't want to, piss off Trump, who may have won. And now he has won, so it looks like, at least from a business perspective, Bezos made the right decision. But the fact that those kind of decisions or thought processes are even happening, right? That shouldn't even be a consideration like that. But it's also bad for billionaires like this to own it, just because it's not a main priority for them, right? It's just one piece of their portfolio. And Swisher points out that, Jeff Bezos, now he's not at Amazon, he's really focused on Blue Origin, his rocket ship company. And she said, talking to Axios, saying, quote, the Post, meaning the Washington Post, the Post can do better. It's so maddening to see what's happening. Why not me? Why not any of us? End quote. So, it would be better if the owners were really cared about journalism. So I do kind of like this idea of Swishers, where it's like a kind of a group of rich people. So the company's not at the whim of any one rich person's needs, whether it be economic needs or political needs or what have you. In a perfect world, journalism would be publicly funded, or at the very least publicly subsidized, right? Things like PBS are always ideal. And PBS is like the gold standard, especially something like, PBS NewsHour. These are reputable programs, as they would say, programs. So, it's just unfortunate, but ultimately journalism, we're going to keep having situations like this because journalism in general, legacy, digital, whatever, it's really going through a lot of growing pains because it's struggling to find its place in a new media ecosystem that essentially has been developing, and it has developed and is still developing since the 90s, right? It still hasn't settled. Social media especially severely hurt the business model because people could just share articles on Facebook and they wouldn't even have to read the article. They could just see the headline and get their news. So I guess the question with all this is, how can journalism be transformed? I think if we can't do publicly funded as an option, I think this is a better choice of having a group of rich people, because again, then it kind of diversifies the will, so to speak, so that decisions are really being made for the best interest of the paper rather than for one specific person. As we saw again with Jeff Bezos, very blatant, very, very obviously killing the endorsement just to curry favor with Trump. That should not factor into any editorial equation. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So Blake Lively has accused her director and co-star of It Ends With Us, the film that came out earlier this year in August. She's accused the director and co-star Justin Baldoni of sexual harassment. And then on top of that, she's also claiming he attempted to mount a very well-coordinated smear campaign against her. The complaint from Lively says, quote, or I think Lively specifically said, quote, I hope that my legal action helps pull back the curtain on these sinister retaliatory tactics to harm people who speak up about misconduct and helps protect others who may be targeted, end quote. Brian Friedman, the lawyer for Baldoni and his production company Wayfarer Studios, of course, clapped back saying, quote, it is shameful that Miss Lively and her representatives would make such serious and categorically false accusations against Mr. Baldoni, Wayfarer Studios, and its representatives. as yet another desperate attempt to fix, quote unquote, her negative reputation, which was garnered from her own remarks and actions during the campaign for the film, interviews and press activities that were observed publicly in real time and unedited, which allowed for the internet to generate their own views and opinions, end quote. So let's dial the clock back for a second. So here's the context. So Lively, again, earlier this year starred in the adaptation of the very popular book, It Ends With Us. Kind of a problematic book from my understanding, but it's basically a story that explores domestic violence and emotional abuse. And she starred in the movie with the director, Justin Baldoni, as in they're like together in a relationship in the story. And we've been hearing about tensions from this production between her and Baldoni, and that kind of like leaked to the public earlier this year. So earlier this year, like about a year ago almost now, January, everyone met. Lively and her representatives, Baldoni's his representatives, Sony, which is the distributor of the film, all met to address Lively's concerns, of which she had many, including, but presumably not limited to, but these are all the ones I could find. These accusations against Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios included Baldoni discussing her weight with her trainer, which if what they were saying is true, supposedly it was because he has a back problem and he had to lift her in a scene he didn't want to hurt himself. I have back problems, so I can empathize, but maybe that's not the full truth. But in any case, that's one of the accusations. Another one, he would press her to disclose her religious beliefs, which is strange. He would talk about his sex life in inappropriate ways, and discussed his pornography, his prior pornography addiction. He claimed he could communicate with the dead, including her recently deceased father, which is like uncomfortable. In addition to not just him, but also the CEO of Wayfarer Studios, Jamie Heath, he showed her a video of his wife naked and giving birth, which is inappropriate for the workplace. Because people often forget, like a film production, yeah, we're making art. It's a workplace, right? Imagine doing any of this stuff at your workplace, in your office with somebody. Right? That's insane. And then also both men allegedly would enter her makeup trailer without her permission, quote, including when she was breastfeeding her infant child, end quote. So, a lot of not very good stuff happening. Not necessarily illegal, but very inappropriate and should not be happening, especially in the workplace. And the complaint reads, quote, regarding this meeting, the concerns Lively raised were not only for herself, but for the other female cast and crew, some of whom had also spoken up, end quote. So it seems like Lively was not the only person that was experiencing this kind of uncomfortable environment. And one of the things that she demanded was obviously stopping all this, but also demanding that Baldoni not add any more sex scenes than what she had already agreed to based off of the original script, right? I guess he kept wanting to add scenes that, she found gratuitous or unnecessary. Again, just weird behavior. That being said, again, the distributor Sony played referee. They agreed to the terms, but Baldoni allegedly, and alleged in big quotes because it's kind of more or less confirmed, began a campaign, a PR campaign, a very covert PR campaign to destroy Lively's reputation. And the complaint, and this is like the big bombshell part, the complaint includes text messages and emails from Baldoni and his publicity team. And the complaint says, quote, Mr. Baldoni and his Wayfarer associates embarked on a sophisticated press and digital plan in retaliation for Miss Lively exercising her legally protected right to speak up about their misconduct on the set, with the additional objective of intimidating her and anyone else from revealing in public what actually occurred. And that they, end quote. And the complaint also alleges that they retained subcontractors who, quote, weaponized a digital army around the country from New York to Los Angeles to create, seed, and promote content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums, end quote. The New York Times, you can find my source in the description if you're watching this as like a separate video. The New York Times published a great breakdown of the concentrated effort to discredit her in the court of public opinion. They worked with a PR person, Melissa Nathan, who, famously also helped Johnny Depp kind of use PR against Amber Heard during their defamation trial, and he ended up winning that trial, unfortunately. During this whole process, I don't want to go through every example this New York Times article does. I really recommend you read it because it's so fascinating. But again, this complaint includes email and text exchanges. So we have a text from Melissa Nathan talking to, I think her name was Jennifer Abel, someone like a PR person at Wayfair Studios. That was kind of like the go-between. Melissa Nathan said in a text, quote, "All press is so overwhelming. We've confused people so much. Mixed messaging. It's actually really funny if you think about it," end quote. That's just awful. You know, in Hollywood, you know, here's the thing about this whole situation. Hollywood doesn't care. Hollywood only cares about money. But this is going to cost a lot, this whole thing, right? You know, the film was made only for about $25 million, but it was a huge financial success. It made $350 plus million at the worldwide box office. So huge percent return. I think it was coming out when I've been doing this YouTube channel. I would talk about it, like the huge percent return. And there is a sequel book. So it would, in any other circumstance, you know, you would be like, well, let's adapt the sequel book. Let's make a sequel to this movie. But this is going to be unlikely because of this drama, right? And even if they somehow wrote Baldoni out of it, the Hollywood Reporter notes that Wayfair Studios owns the rights to the sequel. So, you know, they would still have to work with Baldoni on some level unless he sold the rights. So here's the thing about this whole situation, right? Is that, again, Hollywood cares about money. So you have situations like this with men trying to discredit women. But then you have like a business surrounding it, like that scaffolds around institutional misogyny that benefits from that. It's a business that exists to spread misinformation and quote unquote bury women, which is one of the verbs that they used in these text exchanges. You know, these businesses that exist to bury women speaking out. You know, again, like Melissa Nathan is a woman, right? You would think that there'd be a little more solidarity there. But again, money talks in Hollywood. Again, women helped Baldoni, women helped people like Johnny Depp. This is not a men versus women thing. This is about power and powerlessness. Though again, I don't want to overstate it because of course Blake Lively is very wealthy and very powerful, but at least just in terms of the ratios, right? And again, we got another quote here from Melissa Nathan in these unearthed messages, and she says, quote, "And socials are really, really ramping up in his favor. She must be furious. It's actually sad because it just shows you have people really want to hate on women," end quote. So like they're very aware of it. Like it's almost like if this was a movie and this was written as like the text, I would complain to the screenwriter like this is a little on the nose. They're fully aware of people's implicit bias against women, and they're using that. So I think the biggest lesson here, aside from you know, people shouldn't do the stuff Justin Baldoni did, is PR campaigns work, right? And I, you know, people fall for this kind of stuff, and I include myself in this. So if you look on my channel, I did a video about how Blake Lively was kind of getting into some hot water about how she was kind of handling the press tour for It Ends With Us, kind of being a little insensitive about, considering the film is about domestic violence and emotional abuse. It's come out in documents that this was a concerted effort to like make the film more empowering rather than a story about domestic violence and abuse. I stand by my statements that I think maybe it's like a little tone deaf the way she was going about it, and the way she had talked to that interviewer from a couple years back was kind of rude. But all that being said, you know, I said in that video, like, to be fair to myself, I did say, now we don't have the full story, so I'm just going off the info I have. But I talked about, like, you know, contrast that with Justin Baldoni, who's like using the press tour to talk about these issues and talk about domestic violence. As it's been revealed in these messages, that was a concerted effort to explicitly draw a contrast between him and Blake Lively. So, you know, I include myself in this group that was duped. Again, I'd like to think I was coming at it from good faith, and I couched a lot of what I said was, well, this is based off the info we have. But in any case, it kind of is scary because you kind of take a step back and go, okay, we only found out the real truth because of these like leaked messages. What else could we be wrong about? What you know, celebrity situations do you know about that you only know so much, so you've drawn certain conclusions based off of incomplete or false information, right? And I guess I'll leave you with this question is, you know, what does this say about me, about men, and about society? I don't know if I have the answers. I like to say what I say about me is just, I'm not paid to do this, and I don't have enough time to like thoroughly report these stories. I did the best I could with the information I had, but I think it does say something about society, like Melissa Nathan said in her message, that it's sad to see because it shows just how much people want to hate women. Women still have a long way to go. Men don't want to face the consequences for their actions, and because of that, they rarely do. They work really hard to avoid that. And the hashtag Me Too movement has kind of fizzled out. You have pariahs returning, someone like a Louis C.K., but then you also have people not even becoming pariahs in the first place, like someone like Johnny Depp winning a defamation suit against Amber Heard, right? Though in this particular case, it seems to be very quick consequences for Baldoni. He was dropped by WME, the talent agency that repped him. Everybody involved with the film of If It Ends With Us has come out and supported Blake Lively. I guess Baldoni has a podcast he does with another woman, and the woman has basically left the podcast or put it on hold. The consequences for Baldoni is very swift. So I don't know if that's a sea change, or sometimes corrupt systems need to sacrifice someone so the public feels like the situation has been resolved, whereas in actuality it's a systemic issue. But it looks like Baldoni is facing is facing the consequences of these actions very, very quickly. It seemed like it's like a dam. He was able to successfully kind of hold back the river, and now it's just everywhere. So I apologize to Blake Lively. I think everything I said, most of what I said in my other video, I stand by, and everything I was wrong about, I said in good faith. But I think it does speak to it's hard to know what's true because there's always three sides to the story: his side, her side, and the truth. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 5. So the Library of Congress, as it does every year, will be adding 25 new movies to the National Film Registry. So the way this works, this was created in 1989. There was a big question in the 80s about film preservation of should we be colorizing black and white films? Should we be cropping their aspect ratios to fit on square TVs? Ultimately, Congress passed a law. This was a law passed, I think, in 88, setting up the National Film Preservation Board and the National Film Registry. So the idea is that the public submits potential American films, and they can be full films, they can be short films, they can be a collection of home movies I've seen, if they're historically significant. And that's the thing, is that these have to be American films that they think are, quote, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, end quote. Again, American films, they had to have been released at least 10 years ago. So you can't have something that came out last year. They have to be at least 10 years old. More than 6,700 titles were submitted this year, including from me. I think it opened up in August. And I basically just went through all my favorite movies chronologically, and any movies that weren't already in the registry, I nominated. I think you can nominate up to 100 or something. And this new crop of 25 movies, because they do this every year, again, since 1989, this now brings the total to 900 films in the collection. I got a quote here from the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, saying, quote, "Films reflect our nation's history and culture and must be preserved in our national library for generations to come. This is a collective effort in the film community to preserve our cinematic heritage," end quote. So that's the big thing, is that once it's inducted into the National Film Registry, it becomes archived and preserved at the Library of Congress, to make sure we don't lose this media. Not that we would lose most of these things, but again, we're talking about 100 years from now, maybe we will. Jacqueline Stewart, who's the chair of the National Film Preservation Board, said, quote, "The National Film Registry now includes 900 titles, and what's remarkable to me is that every year when the board talks about films and their significance, we find new titles to consider. The wealth of American film history is sometimes rather overwhelming, and people often wonder, how do you recommend this film or that film? It's through a lot of research, conversation, and discussion, and it's through a commitment to showing the true diversity of filmmaking. I'm thrilled that we recognize student films, independent films, animation, documentary, and experimental works, as well as feature-length narrative drama, comedy, horror, and science fiction on the registry this year," end quote. And again, that's the thing. So people will submit nominations, but then the board will decide from the nominations what 25 films will be chosen. So let me read to you the 25 films in chronological order. Again, some of these are feature films, some of these are documentaries, some of these are student films. It's a wide array of stuff. So the 25 films being inducted are as follows: Annabelle's Serpentine Dance from 1895, Coco's Earth Control from 1928, Angels with Dirty Faces from 1938, Pride of the Yankees from 1942, Invaders from Mars from 1953, The Miracle Worker from 1962, The Chelsea Girls from 1966, Ganja and Hess from 1973, Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, Uptown Saturday Night, also from 1974, the Zora Lathan student films from 1975 to 76, Up in Smoke from 1978, Will from 1981, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan from 1982, Beverly Hills Cop 1984, Dirty Dancing 1987, Common Thread, Stories from the Quilt from 1989, Pow Wow Highway from 1989, My Own Private Idaho 1991, American Me 1992. What's American Me, actually? Hold on, is that what I'm thinking of? American Me. Oh yeah, the movie with Edward James Olmos in the prison. That's right. Anyway, let me continue. Mi Familia 1995, Compensation 1999, Spy Kids from 2001, No Country for Old Men from 2007, and The Social Network from 2010. And I know for a fact I nominated those last two. So I, in a small way, contributed to this year's group of films being inducted. So the story with this is just for you to see the diversity of the kinds of films. Now, if you go back to the very first year, it was kind of the usual suspects. You had like Citizen Kane, Casablanca, Grapes of Wrath, right? Kind of like your standard films, but it's really been diversified. And just in terms of the kinds of things in the registry. And this is just so important because film preservation is so important. And again, the registry acts as a record of the films that we feel reflect our society and our values. It would just be nice if the public could access this registry a little bit more easily. I think you can maybe set up appointments, but it's like hard, and I don't even know if you can do that. So what's the point of preservation if it's locked away? They should create like a streaming service just for the films in the registry and get those rights or whatever, so everyone can access those films from their home. So it's always exciting to see a new batch of films inducted. There's always surprises. I was really not surprised. I was not expecting Spy Kids of all movies, but I think maybe that was included because of how innovative it kind of was in a way with Robert Rodriguez's kind of guerrilla style filmmaking. And, I would imagine maybe that's why. I'm really surprised by Spy Kids. The Social Network is one of the greatest movies ever made. No Country for Old Men is one of the greatest movies ever made. So those aren't surprising. And I do hope I'm able to watch all 900 of these movies at some point because there's a bunch that I have not seen. Okay, that wraps up the show. Thanks so much for watching. Just want to give a few quick plugs. This isn't the only YouTube channel I have. I also have a sister channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment in a more structured video essay format. The video I have right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these kind of cartoon versions of an older, younger version of myself. It would really mean a lot if you go check it out. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Also want to give a plug to the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This season we've been doing Star Wars, which has been so much fun. This upcoming Friday we have our final episode of the season where we do like a franchise retrospective. We had a really great conversation about the nature of Star Wars as a franchise, where we think it should maybe go. It was a lot of fun. Definitely recommend you check it out. You can find the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us down at the link in the description below. And then finally, I want to give a quick plug to Cinema and Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I publish written reviews for new movies coming out. I've been doing it for almost 3 years now. I have like over 100 reviews up. It's been a lot of fun. Would really appreciate you checking that out. You can read my reviews and comment how you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link in the description down below, or you can just go to your web browser, type in cinemanqso.substack.com. Again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and other people finding the channel. So if you have found this channel, subscribe, because we're trying to grow the community. We're trying to make this a little bit bigger so that maybe one day I can get paid 3 cents from ad revenue and I can justify my life decisions to my parents. Well, until next week, peace out.